Good afternoon, class. Today we will be going over Chapter 7 of the Logic and Critical Thinking in the Thinking Socratically text. And in this section, we will be beginning inductive reason, although we've already discussed the topic briefly in the topic on arguments. We'll be looking more thoroughly at inductive reasoning, and Chapter 7 is entitled Supporting Our Claims. The first section, the introductory section, is Evidence, Traces, and Patterns. And the authors include 3 articles in this chapter, all cases involving murders or accidental deaths that are thought to be murders, particularly the second one, which is entitled Trial by Fire. And these are actual cases. And they're going to look at supporting the claims in that context. Now, for this particular chapter, I would only like you to focus on the second article, which is Trial by Fire. Let me go to the 2 particular questions I want you to focus on. And it would be 4 and 5. So 4, do you think Todd Willingham committed arson? Why or why not? Be specific. So this is the suspect in the second case that the book includes. So just read that article for the 3 articles. Read all the other sections in the book, but when it comes to the articles, just read that article. And then also question 5. So these are the 2 questions you want to do for this time. Why do Vasquez and Fogg tell a different story from Hearst? And so Vasquez and Fogg are the 2 original arson investigators. And Todd Willingham's house burns down, and they are suspecting him of arson and murder because his children were in the house and he was unable to get them. And he's being suspected of arson. And so they're the first ones to investigate the incident, and they conclude that he is guilty of arson. And they look at particular sets of evidence and patterns and draw conclusions. And then later on, while he's on death row, another investigator named Hearst re-examines the evidence and concludes that it was an accidental fire and it was not arson. And so this story, or rather article, it's nonfiction, but this excerpt brings in quite a few different elements, all relevant for critical thinking. The first one being the analysis of pattern and evidence. The second being the larger topic and scope of inductive reasoning. And the third being how to evaluate experts. And so when you're evaluating experts, usually the experts know more than the average person. So Vasquez and Fogg know more about arson than us, and so does Hearst. So how do we evaluate which one is more of an expert, if it can be put that way? And even if one is less of an expert than the other, perhaps the other one has drawn a better conclusion. So how do we evaluate different expertise being non-experts? And this article brings together those 3 arguments. So I want you to focus on those 2 last questions, questions 4 and question 5. Now briefly, the introduction to induction, sometimes called the problem of induction. Inductive reasoning is the assertion that the future resembles the past, so much so that the past is generalizable, so that we can predict with we would almost say certainty that the future will be like the past. It allows us to plan in the future. It allows us to understand the present as it becomes both past and the new future becomes present. And it allows us to make all types of predictions, particularly scientific predictions. And scientific knowledge is a form of inductive knowledge, usually a much more thorough and much more tested form, but still a form of inductive knowledge. Hume brings up the fallacy of inductive reasoning. So we cannot have absolute certainty about inductive reasoning because inductive reasoning is itself based on inductive reasoning. And what he means by that is this idea that the future will resemble the past is itself based on the idea that past futures have resembled past pasts, right? And anything in our action that we plan to into our future utilizes inductive reasoning. So if we put water in the freezer to make ice, we are doing that because we assume quite rightly through inductive reasoning that water at a certain temperature turns to ice. And this is something that no one debates. But the reason that we assume this is because in the past it has. We can imagine if we've always lived in a climate where it did not get cold for water to turn cold enough for water to turn to ice, and then we enter into a climate where it does. We wouldn't necessarily assume that that would happen to water. Any of a variety of things could happen to water, just so happened that that happened. And the first time that it happened, we might not assume that it would happen a second time, right? We'd have to see it happen over and over again. And this is much of what scientific testing does. The water to ice example seems rather trivial because it's happened so many times. But we could ask, again, philosophically, not practically, how do we know for sure that it's going to turn to ice at a certain temperature in the future? And there's not a good philosophical answer to that in the sense of absolute certainty, in the sense of something that doesn't rely on induction. The answer is essentially that it always has before in the past. And again, that's good enough practically, but philosophically we might want a better answer. So how does something go from being uncertain to certain? And Hume argued that it has to do with probability, right? The first time when it happens is kind of like flipping a coin. You're not sure if water will turn to ice, then it did, and then it does again. And then pretty soon, if you imagine a fraction, the denominator gets really great, and the numerator gets even greater. So it would be 50% chance, 1/2, and then it'd be 2/3, and then it'd be 3/4, and then now the idea of water turning to ice, it would be like 999 million chances that it will over 1 billion, or 999,000, all nines over 1 billion. So the chance is so great that it's just seen almost as a certainty. But it's still philosophically possible that one day it won't. And that's an interesting idea. And we're not necessarily sure that it won't. It's just our way of apprehending it is such that uncertainty exists in that framework of inductive reasoning. So what does this have to do with practical matters, such as court cases, particularly court cases where a lot of things are at stake, such as the one we read? Well, we assume, again, that the future resembles the past. And so when we look at past cases, such as crimes, such as arsons, we want to be able to generalize enough to be able to tell whether arson was committed or not, or other crimes. It doesn't have to be that. But at the same time, we don't want to overgeneralize too much, where something can resemble in a certain way, but it might also preclude another possibility. And so this story, or again, this event, it is a story, but it is a nonfiction story. This event sort of combines a lot of those elements in critical thinking, analyzing the different expertise of experts and trying to figure out which expert has it correctly, utilizing different ideas of evidence and pattern recognitions and applications to present cases from the past. So we're using inductive reasoning there, and then elaborating and generalizing on patterns. We will also utilize this case in our next discussion on the death penalty. We looked at that in prior assignments, but now we have a practical case and the possibility of human error. And so we have the philosophical concept of the death penalty, and we also have the practical actualization of it, and we'll reflect on how those two interact. So hopefully this is a helpful introduction. Again, just do study questions 4 and 5. Have a good week.